Next up on the show, a man who has made a lot of fans over the last year. Started off, I would say, when he decided to do a little bit of therapy in the form of his Pro Player podcast on the In the Money Media Network. And that story ended like a movie with a record-breaking win in the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. He's back here to talk about Honor Marie with us. If you want to hear his thoughts on all the Kentucky Derby preps, look for the audio show we did a couple of weeks ago. Find that in the Money Players podcast, wherever you get your podcast. I'm speaking, of course, of our resident pro player, Sean Boarman. Sean, how are things?
Good, man. How are you?
Doing great. All Derby all the time here in the Brooklyn bunker, but, we wouldn't have it any other way. Just about a week out from heading down to your part of the world there in Kentucky once again. And excited to talk to you about this horse, Honor Marie, who we were chatting about a little bit on the pod. I mentioned to you, when is this a horse that you sort of became aware of / potentially interested in as a betting vehicle? Let's put it that way.
Became aware of him in the Jockey Club as in that 2-year-old race. I thought that was a really nice race, and I noticed he had a good, finished well. Then probably as a betting vehicle when I did the figures for the Louisiana Derby. He's steadily improving, especially in his late pace figures, and he just looks like a horse that could jump up and run a big race to me.
He's a horse that I noted when Frank McGoey came on the podcast before his seasonal reappearance. So it made a big note when Frank had been out clocking in the mornings and said that he was notably not fully fit and looked like one with that upward trajectory. So it seems like one who maybe will be able to peak in this third race of the form cycle in a run like the Kentucky Derby. A few things I want to ask about him of you. One is, you mentioned the Kentucky Jockey Club and the fact that he's had success over the Churchill Down surface. As somebody who's played Churchill very regularly over a number of years, you hear a lot of stories and narratives about how Churchill's a track that some horses like and some horses don't like. How important for you is that horse for course angle, the fact that he's done well under the Twin Spires as far as your interest in him goes? Is that just narrative, or is there something to that idea of the horse for course Churchill?
No, I think there's something to it. I won't necessarily let that prevent me from betting on a horse if they've run there once and haven't run well, or have never run there. But it definitely makes me feel better if I'm trying to bet on a horse that they have prior Churchill form that's good. I think that's important.
Two other things you mentioned I wanted to follow up on that have come up time and again on the Pro Player podcast we've done. And I encourage folks to go back and listen to those as well. Again, we don't have video. We don't do enough video with you, Sean. You're a handsome man. I don't know why we don't have you on in front of the camera more, but audio only, people. We've got hours of good stuff. If you go back in the archive of, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast, if you subscribe to that In the Money Players pod, you'll be able to listen to this stuff. But you talked about the idea of this horse as one who's improving. Now, I know that sounds pretty basic, bet on a horse that's improving, but a lot of times you hear people, wanting to make excuses for bad last races and come up with clever cases based on a run, maybe 3 races back. It does feel to me in all of our conversations that you really give primacy to that idea of a last race. Well, whether it's just great on its face or shows some signs of improving, a horse sort of touting themselves that they're going to do even better last time. Is that an accurate assessment of the way you look at it? And why is that improving last race so important to the way you play the horses?
Yeah, that's an accurate way of putting it. I think it's important just because these horses go through form cycles, and I think when horses, for Honor Marie, for example, he ran faster at every point of call on my figures than he did in his previous race, and that can only mean the horse is getting better and improving, in my opinion. I don't really subscribe to the idea of that's a negative thing, like a bounce is coming. I just, horses regress, sure, but I don't think that there's a set rule of, well, he ran too big last time, he can't run that back. I always try to play horses that are improving, especially when they improve the way this horse did. He ran faster early, even though he was far back in the pack and was a closer. His pace figures are faster. He ran a 104 late pace figure, which is very, very good for 3-year-olds at this time of year. So the fact that he exerted himself a little more early, still finished, pretty elite for this time of year for a 3-year-old, he's got to be improving. And I love to hear that Frank thought he was a little short, because now it'll be 3 times. This will be his 3rd time out this year, and you should get a peak effort, from a horse like this. So that's, I don't always bet on training information or clocking information, but when it corroborates what I'm seeing in my figures, I love it. And I think there's just a lot of positive signs pointing to this horse running well.
We got a lot of new people around here coming to us via YouTube. You mentioned about late pace on the shows. You've talked about this many, many times. It's not something you hear about that often in dirt races, even from experienced horse players. It is something you hear about all the time when it comes to turf racing. Why, in your experience, is the late pace figure such an important thing when it comes to evaluating dirt form?
I just think, I try not to look at it on surfaces. It's just, to me, it's how horses finish off a race, especially when combined with how they've run early, is just the most important thing to me. I mean, there's a lot of horses that can run graded stakes type early pace figures that end up as 10 claimers or 20 claimers because they just can't finish races. They can't put it all together and accelerate through the wire, but the best horses can. And, I just think I think it's the most important segment of the race, from a figure standpoint, but it's got to be used in conjunction with the other pace figures and the final figure, because, you don't want to bet a horse that has good late pace figures that just is so slow early that it doesn't matter. They're just going to be too far back and can't catch up. And then it all depends on, the type of field they're running in. I mean, in this Derby, the good fierceness runs some of the best late pace figures. So if he's stalking the pace and runs his A race, even these horses with slightly better late pace figures that are really, really good for 3-year-olds in the Derby, they won't be able to catch him. But if he runs sort of his B race, he could run off the board. So it's just to me, it dictates almost everything, especially from a gambling point of view, because it's underpriced still, in my opinion, in most of the markets.
These mini pods are brought to you by Free Rein Coffee Company. They've been powering the In the Money team throughout the Triple Crown prep season, and the coffee is fantastic. Whether you're looking for whole beans, grounds, or pods, Free Rein give you what you need to get up and get after it. And they've got subscriptions available too, so you never run out. Use our promo code MONEY20 for a 20% discount site-wide over at freereigncoffee.com. During Kentucky Derby week, you can get $10 money back if your win selection runs second or third. For all the information, check out twinspires.com. Let's take another second and look at the race at large. You've made a strong case why Honor Marie is interesting. And we haven't even mentioned the fact that in the UK anyway right now, best price is around 33 to 1. We're not talking about one of the favorites when we talk about Honor Marie. But from this far out, and we are asking you this pretty early on, what do you think about the pace scenario for him? Does he have enough early speed with what he's shown lately that he can maybe make his own trip a little bit? Or is he going to be at the mercy of the pace? What kind of pace in general are you expecting in this year's Kentucky Derby?
I think on paper it should be sort of average to slightly above average. But in the Derby, it always seems to get a little bit hotter than it seems like on paper it should. So I'm expecting there to be enough pace for some closers to be involved, and it could get fast if somebody gets brave and tries to really slam out of there, and then the post position draw is going to mean a lot in this Derby too. Honor Marie, in my experience, horses with this kind of profile are eligible to run much faster early than they have in the past. But that just depends on draw and jockey. you sort of, I'm going to guess that he's pretty far back and is probably more likely to round out tries and supers than win the race. But if he gets a draw to where they have to be a little more aggressive and put him in the race sooner to avoid trouble or get a position, I think he can do that. I think he could certainly run mid pack to maybe even close to the top quarter of the field and still run his race. He's talented enough to that. It just depends on so many circumstances.
Where do you want to see him drawn, Sean?
That's a good question. I was thinking about that right before we hopped on here. I think with a horse like this, I don't really want to see him 1, 2, or 3, just to avoid that sort of crunch going into the first turn. But other than that, I think he should be pretty well suited wherever. I mean, if he gets a really wide draw, they're just going to ride him cold and drop back and try to save ground, which suits him fine. If he draws in the middle, that should be fine too. It's just those first 3 or 4 spots, I think, would be the worst.
In terms of your actual betting on the race, I mean, it sounds like you see him as at least a peripheral win candidate, but how do you see using him in terms of your actual wagers?
I think I'll certainly use him in probably everything I do, especially if he's 25, 30 to 1. I I could even see myself potentially keying him and sort of pressing him underneath if I have a clear view on who wins the race. I mean, one bet I will certainly make is a fierceness Honor Marie exacta, because I think that could be paying well, and I think it'll be paying better in relation to his chances of running second than like fierceness over Sierra Leone or fierceness over Catching Freedom. I think he could be the closer that is underpriced the most. So I think that's a play I'll definitely make. From there, I'm not really sure yet.
Great stuff, Sean. And you say you're not sure yet. We will check back in with you week of. Hopefully, we'll be able to put together a pro player roundtable. We'll recruit somebody else and have the fun chat we've had the last few years. That'll be audio only content. So if there's one message for you watching on YouTube, make sure if you want to get everything, make sure you subscribe to the audio feeds as well. Of course, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss any of the great Derby content we have coming down the pike. Sean, thank you so much for your time today, and Godspeed, my friend.
See you soon, man.